I recently did a video talking about a doctor here who was a family medicine doctor that during her drop off, she was dropping her kid off at school, a private school here located in the Upper East Side, and she didn't have a mask on. And of course, as a result of not having a mask on, the school nurse came outside along with security and they made a big fuss about it. And eventually what happened was that doctor lost custody of her case, of her child, because her husband, who she was estranged from, they were already separated and divorced, then used that information to basically leverage against her in court. And as a result, between the school and her husband, she ended up losing custody over the welfare of the child. And this is what I said before, that when, especially now, because of the direction that women are leaning more on the state than unfortunately on the men in their lives, their husbands, as a result, you become perpetually married to the state. And so these individuals are the ones who basically own your child. If they don't like what's going on in your home, if you don't follow the narrative, you could lose custody of your child. And this is a perfect example. This was actually last year in 2020 in April, during the beginning of what was going on then. It says an ER doctor loses custody of her daughter because of fears, right? And so it says an emergency room doctor in Miami has temporarily lost custody of her 4-year-old daughter while she treats patients during pandemic. This Dr. Teresa Green told CNN's New Day that she was appealing the emergency order that granted her ex-husband full custody of their daughter. I think it's not fair. It's cruel to ask me to choose between my child and the oath that I took as a physician, Green said. I won't abandon my team at work or the patients who will increasingly look to me to save their lives in the coming weeks, but it's torture. Ms. Green and her ex-husband have been divorced for almost 2 years and have split time with their daughter evenly. This last week, the circuit court judge Bernard Shapiro ruled that the child should stay with her father, Eric Green, to limit the risk of exposure. It says the court does not enter this order lightly, but given the pandemic in Florida, and again, notice where this took place, right? In Florida, where the recent increase in confirmed cases, it says the court finds it order to insulate and protect the best interests and health of the minor child. It says this order must be entered on a temporary basis, the judge wrote in the court ruling. It goes on to say, it says Teresa Green told CNN that she felt the order discriminated against her as a divorced parent. This, if I was married, I'd be given the opportunity to go home to my child. It says no one could tell me. No one could tell me I shouldn't do that. And of course, this is very unfortunate, where you have a doctor who is basically on the front lines as an emergency room physician, who will be seeing patients face to face who are coming into an emergency room setting who are sick. Some of these doctors have to work even upwards of 24-hour shifts, where they're basically there for 12 or more hours, and then they stay at the hospital because they're required to be on call. Some of them will work all night and then will actually work during the day doing like telehealth. So for me, thinking about this, it's unimaginable to think that a woman who is a doctor, who is putting her life at risk, saving other patients during a pandemic, then loses her right to see her child. Think about that. It says, Teresa Green said she'd be able to wear full PPE while treating patients, and that she's done everything that she could to avoid contracting the disease. She said her daughter generally stays with her ex-husband when she works. It says, yes, it's severe and there is danger, and we're being very careful, she said. We use everything we can and actually worn equipment above and beyond to protect myself and my child, right? So it doesn't matter the fact that she's taken everything into consideration, right? She is a doctor. She is much more aware than the courts are about how this disease works and how to protect herself and the risks that are associated with, of course, having her child in the home. But none of that matters. And this just goes to show you that even though this is typically the treatment that men see in the court setting, especially during divorce when it comes to child custodies, that also, when necessary, the courts will also not act in favor of the woman, who typically has a much stronger bond, especially with a young 4-year-old child. I couldn't imagine being a woman who has given birth to a child, had that child, grow inside of you, and then have the state choose to take that child away, even if it's quote unquote, temporarily. To imagine that you have taken the choice to put your life at risk, which is in the very beginning, it was unsure of how deadly the virus was. And so you have someone putting their life at risk, taking every precaution needed, and the state deeming you unworthy of seeing the child that you gave birth to. Meanwhile, there's other people out here doing who knows what, teaching their child who knows what in their homes, which many are unfortunately not necessarily fit to be good parents. But here you have a woman who was obviously educated and caring and loving towards her child, and the court deems her unfit to temporarily see her child, not just to have the child in her home, but she's not even allowed to see the child, which is unimaginable. Says in a statement, Green's attorney said that Mr. Green and I have the utmost respect for Dr. Green's commitment to her critical work during this pandemic. And of course, you can tell by him basically stripping her of her parental rights. It says, we recognize and genuinely appreciate the sacrifices that she and all healthcare workers have done. And if you really appreciate what someone does, it's typically shown by what you do, right? It's not just by what you speak. It's also by the actions that are taken that show you have appreciation for what someone is doing, right? It says, she's currently making to save lives and prevent further illness in Florida and around the world. It says Green's temporarily time-sharing dispute was presented before the court based upon the specific facts of this individual's family, and a decision was reached based upon the, of course, best interest and safety of the minor, limited to the temporary circumstances related to, right, that. Because the court's ruling was not intended to serve as a blanket rule, but the reality is that now, then again, this is back then, right? This was in the beginning of 2020. The article I did is the most recent article. So like I said before, when courts side in a specific way, this allows other jurisdictions to basically point back to what was done as precedents, or because of extreme reasons, they can use this and say, well, this judge did this. So now it gives this particular judge the opportunity to say, okay, maybe I'll rule in favor because of this precedence that was set. And this is why it's very dangerous, and that these courts have way too much power, even to the point of severing parents' ability to parent their child in their own best interest, right? She's the one who provides for this child. She's the one that gave birth to this child, even though it is accompanied with, of course, the ex-husband in the relationship. But for the courts to step in such a way shows very little respect for, of course, families. And this is one of the biggest problems in America, is that we're seeing the breakup of the family, and typically it's the courts and the government that has basically the superseding authority over everything that goes on within the home. If you posted on social media, like I showed in that other video, that you're not as fearful as other individuals, and that you're not necessarily using precautions because other people are more fearful than you are, they can actually use that in a court against you to show that you're acting in a way that is not in the best interest of a child. Maybe you don't want your child because maybe you've heard of all of these different instances of people, right, getting the jab and then falling ill as a result, and the court will deem maybe that perhaps according to their beliefs that you are not fit because of, as they say here, the best interest of the child. As the court's ruling going on, it says Green is to be provided future makeup, time sharing for each day missed during the challenging time, and daily video communication with the child. We will continue to pursue ways to resolve this delicate situation and believe that as a result can be achieved safely. It says Teresa Green said that her daughter doesn't understand what's going on, but she knows that her mom is sad. I want her, it says, I want her when she grows up to be proud of me by abiding by the oath that I took when I went into medicine. But I also know that she needs me. She said, Teresa Green said that she doesn't know when she'll get to see her daughter again because there's no way to know when the pandemic will be over. And I would love to know what the follow-up is to this doctor, to see if she, as far as we know, maybe she hasn't even seen her daughter since. I'll actually have to look up to see if there was some sort of a follow-up video. But this is what I talk about, that it's important for, you don't really hear about this stuff in the mainstream media. It might get covered in an article like in this one, but it gets covered online. And if you're not following them online, you'll never hear of these instances unless someone like myself covers it in a video. If you like the content, of course, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll check you out next time. Thank you very much for watching.